Hello, people.
You can be the.
All right. Wonderful. Can everyone hear us? I see some heads nodding, some thumbs up. We're good. Wow, it's good to see your beautiful faces. Hope College students and Hope College alums. So welcome to this St. Benedict Institute event. What is Courtship? Also just want to encourage you, if you haven't done so, to sign up for next week. Jack and Melissa Mulder, two other wonderful professors at Hope College, will be talking about sex and theology of the body. So that'll be a very, very good, interesting, and humorous talk, I can assure you. And again, if you're not on our mailing list, make sure that you sign up and get on our mailing list. So again, tonight we are, this is part of our series on courtship, marriage, and sex. I ran into another professor tonight here at Hope College, and he said, "Oh, this is your event on courtship and mating." I said, no, it's our event on courtship and breeding like rabbits. But no, courtship, marriage, sex, we'll get a little bit of all of them, discuss a little bit of all of them tonight. So anyway, so most of you know me, Rhonda Ortiz, teach Catholic theology at Hope College, and also I'm the director of the St. Benedict Institute. Some of you know my beautiful wife, Rhonda Ortiz, who is an author and also now an editor. So you can check out her website as well, not during the seminar, but after the seminar, you can check out her website. And also she just got a contract for her first novel. So we're very excited in our household. So anyway, once that goes through the whole process, which will be like another year or so, you all can buy the book and read it. It'll be very good.
Yeah, publishing industry is not a fast one, so it'll be a while.
Like courtship, it's slow.
And methodical.
All right, so let's get started. So basically what we'll do is I'll start with some opening comments about just, what is courtship, and a little bit of the history of it, marriage, some challenges that we face today. Rhonda's going to talk a little bit then about men and women and the differences between men and women. And then we'll end with a few guidelines, and hopefully that'll be about 45 minutes, though we tend to talk long. But then we will open it up for questions and answers, and we can go as long as you guys want with Q&A. We got a babysitter, so we can stay out all night. We're good. So, this question of courtship, marriage, sex, finding the right one, this is the most important decision you'll ever make, right? So all of you are worried about getting, many of your seniors, you're worried about getting jobs and things like that, but you're going to change your job, and often you'll change your job, for the better. And you'll be happier, you'll go to a new job, it'll be better, it'll be a better fit, better talent, for your talents. But if you change your spouse, right, it's going to be really horrible. It's going to be horrible for you. It's going to be horrible for your spouse. It's going to be horrible for your family, their family. If you have kids, it's going to be horrible for your kids, right? So this is really the most important decision you will ever make. It's the one that's probably most determinative of, your happiness, right? Because you have to be with this person for the next 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years.
Long time.
Anyway, till COVID knocks me off, you're going to be with me.
Sorry.
So it's the most important decision we'll ever make, but it's also the one we have the least guidance for. It's the one we are the least prepared for. It's the one we receive the least instruction. You've all had 16 years of schooling now, so, you will have, some of you go to graduate school, you have more schooling, for your jobs. And how many classes have you taken on how to find a mate? How many, how much instruction have we received? So we live in a time where there's just not a lot of instruction. There used to be a time where, there was just different approaches to finding a mate. So in the old days, there was arranged marriages, and now that's something that's sort of very repugnant to us. We don't trust our parents, or we at least wouldn't want them making decisions for us. But I want to at least start with arranged marriages and say there's some wisdom in arranged marriages. Not that we want to go back to that. I don't think there's any way we could, and no one would be for it.
And we don't have an arranged marriage, just putting that out there.
Mail order. No. But there is some wisdom in arranged marriages, and I think what courtship can do is actually to bring some of that wisdom into a practice that we can do. So what's the wisdom of arranged marriages? Well, the first thing is that the families are highly involved, right? So your parents who are older and wiser, and again, people used to marry much younger, right? So imagine if you had to choose a spouse at 15 years old, right? You wouldn't really trust yourself, right? So your parents are older and wiser. They have your best interests at heart. They have experience. Presumably they're friends with another family, right? And they think it's a good match. They think you'll be happy. They think the families will get along, right? So the families are highly involved. You have people who are guiding you who are wise. So that's sort of one strength, just in terms of the decision making. The other strength of an arranged marriage is that the couple goes in with very, I don't want to say low expectations, but very few expectations. When you marry for love, you have very high expectations. All of our music, right? All of our love songs, all of our movies, right? You find the one, capital T, capital O, you find the one. And this one is going to, fulfill all of your dreams, right? That's a lot of pressure to put on one human being. It's perhaps slightly idolatrous, right? So the wisdom of an arranged marriage, actually you go in without love, right? But what you do is you build love through a shared life together, right? Through the shared project of making a home and making a family and raising your children, right? And what happens is love grows up in the best, at least in the best of those arrangements. Now, again, we're not going back to that, and there's obviously drawbacks, and we can name all those drawbacks. But we don't have arranged marriages. We have almost the opposite, right? Which is dating, right? Now, dating is a mysterious thing. It really is a mysterious thing. What is it? What is it? What does the word even mean, right? To go on a date, right? I have actually no idea. I didn't even look this up, right? But what is dating, right? As an activity, right? It's just a strange word. But more importantly, what is the goal of dating, right? And if you interviewed, 100 people, you'd probably get, 50 answers. What is the goal of dating? Is it to hang out? Is it to have fun? Is it to find a spouse? Is it to have sex? Right? Swipe right. What's the point of dating? Right? What's the goal? What are the boundaries of dating? Right? Are there any sort of fixed boundaries when it comes to dating? No one really knows. And so dating, while kind of fun, right? Or can be fun, can also be horrible. There's like speed dating, right? Blind dates. There's all sorts of weird things. What the heck is it anyway? But dating just doesn't offer much guidance about how to do this dance, right? And how to do it in a way that's going to actually lead to your happiness and the other person's happiness. And so that's why I think courtship is different. Courtship, the goal is marriage, right? There's clear boundaries, which we'll talk about. And family and friends are usually highly involved, right? So it's a different thing. Now, before I get into courtship proper, I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that you guys faced. Now, we faced some of these in our generation. Your generation, I think, is probably a little more handicapped in this regard. So just a few, just in no particular order. So the one problem that all of you know about, is, widespread pornography use. This is a problem for men. This is a problem for women. Your generation with the phones, it's just a constant temptation, source of temptation. And what does this do to us? Well, it does a lot of things to us, right? It distorts how we see each other. It distorts our expectations of what should happen. It tends to make us want to use other people for pleasure. We get trapped in ourselves in harmful patterns of behavior. So we feel shame and guilt, right? And then of course that has to be confessed to the people we date. And then, you know, it's awkward, right? Also a big problem I think that pornography creates, in addition to all of those problems, is that it makes it very hard to talk to real people. That, you know, if you live in a fantasy world where people just give you, these images give you pleasure and don't demand anything from you, it's very hard to go from that to a real person who is complex, who has feelings, who has desires, who has a will, right? And someone you have to navigate, right? Someone who's not there simply for your pleasure. So this happens a lot, right? That people get habituated to the internet, have trouble bridging the gap to real people, to real relationships, to real romance. And that's just a widespread problem that we have to acknowledge. Other obstacles, other challenges for you guys. We get no guidance or we get bad guidance, right? How many of you, your parents have talked to you about this? How many of them have given you, you know, advice? TV, internet, Netflix, all these just give bad examples of how to do this, right? Should we sleep together on the first date, right? Like that's the question, right? So again, it's just a different moral framework, you know, and it's usually a bad one. You know, sex first, relationship later, you know. So we have just bad guidance, right? Our friends, are they wise? Are your friends wise? Mine weren't, they were dumb.
Hopefully they're not watching.
I know, yeah, anyway. I had some good friends later, they were great. The church doesn't speak about this often, right? They don't give guidance, right? Often our parents are divorced, so we don't actually have models of what a marriage looks like and what it means to work through problems, right? So and the widespread divorce culture in our parents' generation, you know, and that affects us, right? That also handicaps us. It makes it hard for us to commit. It makes it hard for us to know, right? It's like someone explained it to me as trying to learn how to dance, but never having seen a dance before. Your generation, more than previous generations, has this fear of commitment, which may or may not be your fault, but you're certainly responsible for it now because it's now your fears. But you guys have trouble committing to things, even dinner, even I see by our participant count showing up to this event. You know, people have fear of commitment, okay? And then the challenge again of the myth of the one, which we should just debunk really quickly. There's not just one person for you to marry, right? You'd be happy, I think, with a number of people, right? A number of good people. If you find, you know, good people, you could be happy with a number of good people. There's not just one, because look, if there's just one, if some one person marries the wrong one, then everyone else is screwed, right? So just statistically, right? It's just impossible, right? So there's no one, right? But there may be one that God wants you to marry, right? And so how do we discern that? So again, this is where I think courtship is really helpful, right? So courtship again places this romance in the context of a family, right? So there's a great article I read called "From Front Porch to Back Seat," right? Talking about the history of going from courting to dating, right? So you know traditionally courtship takes place in the context of the family. If you've seen Jane Austen movies, right? They show up with their card and they present themselves and they go and they sit with the family and they have to endure the parents who are weird and the siblings who are embarrassing, right? But and you know, they sit on those uncomfortable chairs and they have to talk, right? But it takes place in the family, right? If there is private time, but usually it's chaperoned private time, right? You sit on the front porch, so you have a little bit of privacy to talk and let the romance develop, but it's still within the umbrella of the family. What that also does is it provides generational wisdom, right? So again, you have your parents there, you have your siblings there, right? It also reminds you what this is ordered towards, right? Which is marriage and family. Courtship is about largely about romance, right? Today we talk about relationships, right? And it's hard to get away from that language. But the word relation, relatus, right? A latus is a shoulder, right? So relation, we're in a relationship, we're kind of shoulder to shoulder. Whereas a romance is look into my eyes. Right? So, you're looking at each other. It's a romance, right? It's love, and it's this beautiful kind of exchange of persons. Now, what's interesting in my generation, our generation, and your generation, which are kind of overlapping generations because I'm not that old, is what replaced the family is the friend group, right? Because most of you date in high school or you date in college where your parents can't be there, right? And so you don't have your parents. You say, so how can we do that? Well, the friend group often provides a nice, sort of a safe space for these romances to blossom. Because what it does is it allows you to get to know each other, right, outside of problematic context, right? It allows you to develop a friendship and to really get to know the character of the other person. And that's really the key to courtship, I think, is what courtship does is it allows you to discern the character of the other person, right? With dating, again, because there's weird pressures, because there's no boundaries, because you can fall into all sorts of things when you're alone, in the back seat, on the couch, wherever, right? You bypass all the important stuff, which is discerning the character of the other person. And what you're trying to discern is, will this person be a good spouse? And will this person be a good father or mother to my children? Right? Because that's what you're really trying to discern. Not, is she cute? She is cute, right? That's a given, right? Can we make out? Sure, right. It'll be great someday, right? But that's not like, you don't need to test that out so early, right? It's going to happen eventually, right? But what you really need to find out, the key thing is this a good person? Can I trust this person? Can I open up to this person? Will this person be there for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, right? Is this a person whose character is going to endure all the ups and downs of a lifetime relationship? Is this the kind of person I want raising my kids, right? Because most of you are going to have kids unless you join a convent, or become a priest, right? You're going to have kids, right? And you're going to raise those kids with someone. Does this person share what I share? Does this person love what I love? Does this person care about what I care about? And then and you discern that, and then it's a good indication they'll be a good spouse and a good parent. What courtship does by putting in boundaries, and again, we'll talk about those boundaries at the end, but by putting in boundaries, especially physical boundaries, and even emotional boundaries to a certain extent, is what it does is it cultivates love and respect for the other person. It's very well known. They do psychological studies on this. That men, when they see things, just their visual stimuli and the way their brains are wired, is that they recognize bodies first, right? So they look and they're like, "That's a shapely body. I like that," right? And that's just natural, right? That's what men do, right? But they can't stay there, right? So men need to know this, but also women need to know this, right? Because part of what courtship does is it transforms lust into love, or if you don't want to be so dramatic, it transforms sensuality into respect, right? So you move from the sense stimuli, she's really good looking or he's really good looking, I'm attracted to this person, that's good, natural, fine. But if it remains there, right, it's just a sensual relationship. It's not an enduring one, right? And so you have to integrate that sensuality into the emotions, right? I care about this person. This person makes me feel happy, right? So into the emotions. But then beyond feelings, which are also fleeting, right? I love this person for who she is. I love the person, right? So you move from sensuality to the person, to recognizing the value of the person in himself or in herself. So courtship is an exercise in self-mastery, right? And so it requires sacrifice, a sacrifice of your desires, a sacrifice of your time, a sacrifice of wanting to talk and fill the space, right? And so you have to listen and receive, right? And it's exchange of persons, right? And what that does is, again, it elevates the gaze, right? From the body to the face, and from the face to the person, right? It's a training in love. And so the traditional definition of love, going back to Aquinas, actually back to Augustine really, is to love is to will the good of another. To will the good of another. Now, that's not a very sexy definition, okay? I always find it kind of boring when I hear it. To love is to will the good of another. You're like, no, but love is this thing. It's so great and it's exalted and it's one. And right, so okay, fine, it is. It's great. But in the end, love is to will the good of another. Because think about it. Think about the difference between to love and to fall in love, right? And just think about that word, to fall in love, right? To fall in love is an act of nature. It's gravity. You don't even have to do anything, right? It just happens to you, right? And again, falling in love is wonderful. We fell in love. Okay, fine. I'll admit it. I was sensitive once. But like, so falling in love, right? It happens, but it's a natural thing. But the thing is, you fall into love, you can also fall out of love, right? It's falling, right? You can stumble around your romantic life for a long time, right? But what courtship does is it takes those kind of exalted feelings and it trains them to will the good of the other person, not just you make me feel good. I want to do things with you. I want to hang out with you. I want to be with you. I want to kiss you. But what is good for you, right? And I will your good. I want what's good for you, and I'm going to do the things that are good for you, and that's going to show my love. So more I could say on courtship, and again, I'll come back to some of the rules in a little bit. But one of the nice things about courtship, and I think Rhonda's going to talk more about this, is like courtship respects that men and women are different. And I know that's a very controversial statement today, but we're not St. Benedict event, so we can say these things. You know, we're taught that men and women are not different. Boys and girls get this identical education, you know, through their 12 years of school, through college. Like, we don't treat men and women different. But we know, I mean, we all feel this, but we've all had experience of this, that men and women are different. They have different inclinations, different needs, different desires. And so what courtship does is actually respects those differences in the dance of romance, in the dance of navigating desire and restraint, right? Courtship respects that men and women are different. And so with that, I'll pass it off to you.
All right. You know, so we, you know, again, you know, coming to what's the goal, right? The goal is to get to know the other person, to discern, and everything that you're doing is aimed toward that. Now, what's interesting is they say, okay, well, what does that look like? And I think in order to, you know, in order to talk about what that looks like, it's important to know about men and women, just simply like, what's the difference between men and women? And I think, and like Jared said, you know, talking about, you know, male female distinction, or like having conversation about how we're, you know, man is from Mars, woman is from Venus, right? Sounds quaint at best and sexist at worst. And you know, again, we're used to flattening these differences. But so what I'm going to do just now is it's just going to take it down to just a physiological level and just talk about what's going on when we encounter another person. And I'm going to skip to the end. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sex, and because we like keeping it scandalous here. No, just kidding. And I just want to talk about that because I think it actually governs the kinds of decisions we make and the kind of the approach that we typically take. So, and also it like just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because oftentimes if we don't really understand human sexuality, especially in terms of the other person, or the, you know, in terms of, in my case, in understanding male sexuality, these kind of ignorant spots really do lead to a lot of problems in our courtship and our relationship with the other with other people. So I just want to talk a little bit about the hormones involved in lovemaking, and so I think, and my science people out there, please just bear with me, okay? I'm you know, I'm just doing this from what I read on the internet, so we'll see how this is really going to go down. But anyway, so there's the primary hormones involved in lovemaking are testosterone, are oxytocin and dopamine. And so if you know these words before, right, testosterone is oftentimes, it's responsible, it's underlying libido, and it's also leads to a lot of behaviors around like domination and, you know, subduing the other person or whatever. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone. That makes you feel like you're connected to the other person. And then dopamine is pleasure. And we all experience this. Men and women alike have these hormones released during lovemaking. But the levels of hormones and the consequential psychology of lovemaking look different. And this is, I think, really, really important here. So I'm going to start with women. I'm a woman. We'll start there. Women produce higher levels of oxytocin during lovemaking than men. So oxytocin is bonding. And they receive an extra surge of oxytocin right at the end. However, men experience an extra surge of dopamine, pleasure. Okay, so it's interesting that right away you're talking about, okay, women and men are getting a little something. The aim there is a little bit different at the end. Interestingly enough, oxytocin is also the hormone that induces labor. And women experience a big surge of oxytocin right after birth. And I can tell you that that is a rush. It is the weirdest experience. Oxytocin is also released during nursing, when a woman nurses her baby. So I just want to put all this together. Lovemaking gets oxytocin, birthing a baby gets oxytocin, and nursing a baby gets oxytocin. And if you think that these are not related, I think, you know, they are. You need to know that. So a woman's sexuality, these are all interconnected. And then to understand, just even on a physical level, lovemaking is an experience that happens within our bodies, right? Inside our bodies. You know, the man gives, the woman receives, and our bodies are designed to give back, right? I mean, in that sense of like, there's a womb, babies are made, babies come out. Okay, so there's this kind of interchange that happens within our bodies, and it's related. And the hormone that kind of the experience for women is so very, very strongly tied to bonding. So if you think about this, a woman bonds to a man, a wife bonds to her husband in a sexual way. In the same way, she bonds to her children in a non-sexual way. In other words, men, when you make love to a woman, she is bonding to you sexually in the way that your mother is bonded to you, not sexually. Okay? So this is really, really important to understand, right? Because if you can imagine your mother right now, you know, maybe you don't want to, you're listening to this talk and you're like, Mom, I don't want that thought in my head. But, you know, if you imagine your mother, the state of your mother's heart, right? Can you imagine your mother abandoning you? And like that, how awful that would be. If you can imagine, or if you, on the converse, if you abandon your mother, can you imagine how she would feel? Okay, so if you let that sink in and then apply it to your girlfriend, that will probably change the way you treat her. You know, that has an impact with that knowledge of she's experiencing bonding in a way that, you know, that's very, very, very strong. It's not, if you're not ready to commit your life to a woman, if you're not ready to commit your life to your girlfriend, don't make love to her. It's just not fair. You know, I mean, you're doing that. There's something happening in her body. Okay. Men, on the other hand, okay, and I think a lot of you know this, right? Naturally have more testosterone than women. It's responsible sexual drive. It underlies a man's drive for achievement, and like I said, domination. And between the state of puberty and 30, testosterone's at its peak. So ladies, you need to also understand this about men. It's important to understand that men, you're like, especially at this, like the men you're around, you know, there's kind of a constant like underlying state of tension. You know, it's just the normal day to day. In other words, it doesn't all take all that much to turn a man on. right? And so that's just nature talking. That's just the way, that's just like the levels of testosterone going. Okay. And I think you need to be aware of that, especially when you're courting, right? Because, that's just at a basic level, that's what that is. Okay. Um, and so interestingly enough, and like I said, our bodies release these three hormones during lovemaking. Men's bodies also release oxytocin during lovemaking. However, the levels are not as high as it is for women, and they don't receive a surge of it at the end. Okay, again, they experience that, like the big thing at the end is pleasure. And then also, if you have high levels of testosterone, it suppresses oxytocin. All right, so men already have higher levels of testosterone, and if it happens to be kind of wonky, it does actually suppress the bodies, like the way the body like receives it or whatever. So I think this is the other thing to recognize, is that men do not have the same experience of bonding, or like the acute experience of bonding, that women do. So and it's in and unfortunately, and this is why it's, I think, sometimes a lot easier for a man to walk away from a relationship than it is for a woman. Again, it's not that the bonding isn't there, it is there, the oxytocin is there, but they don't experience it to the same nth degree. Okay, so if knowing this about each other, and I think this is really important to know, because it does change your the viewpoint of the other person, is to say, what's the goal then, or how do you approach courtship when you know this? And the question is to make the goal then is to make a commitment rooted in a knowledge of the other, and in your will, in making that decision. And I think this is especially important for men, because whereas a woman's bonding is very strong within her body, I think a man needs strengthening, in terms of just being bonded. And I think it's just again, this is nature talking. Like, absolutely imperative that a man makes a good, strong, mature, integrity based, clear decision about, I am going to commit my life to this woman. And so that's the goal of courtship, right? That's why you get to know each other. That's why you spend time talking. That's why you do things with other people, and you get to see the relationships and get to see them in their family. And does he treat his mom well? Those sorts of things. And conversely with women, men for women, is she caring? Does she think about, whatever those qualities that you're looking for in a spouse? So again, but it's imperative, especially for men, that's really, really important to engage your will, not to just get caught up in the feelings, but to really make those things, make that decision. And you're looking to make a vow, and you're looking to make a decision to say, I am going to love this woman and our children, in your words and in your self-sacrificing deeds. That a man's bonding is a man's devotion to his wife. It comes in the form of active loving, and that is a matter of integrity, and that you're taking a vow, right? A vow is when you hold your soul in your hands and you say before God, I'm going to do this. So it is a matter of integrity. And obviously women do this too, but I think just realizing like why that is, in terms of how this plays out into kind of traditional, I'm sorry, I'm tired. Playing out into traditional courtship roles. Why is it the man's job to pop the question? Why is it the man's job to get down on his knee and find the ring? That's because that in terms of taking the commitment, in terms of the bonding, there's a lot kind of hinging on that, on taking the lead in terms of commitment. Conversely, it's the woman typically, or like traditionally, takes the lead on chastity. And that I want to talk about this a little bit, because I'm veering off into what I think is really unpopular if we don't understand it within the context of what's happening in our bodies. And the reason that we traditionally take the lead in maintaining chastity as you're courting is not because men get a free pass. I think we take the lead first because we feel the consequences of love making more acutely, both emotionally and physically, right? Like chastity is just, first of all, straight up self-preservation. You know, you don't want a baby, you know, you don't want a baby before it's time, right? Um, and, you know, and, you know, it's hard to discern whether or not you want to be bonded to a man if you're already bonded to him. You know, you need to discern his character before you get bonded. You know, and we all know relationships where like, you know, you've got these like really awful relationships and you're like, why doesn't she just leave him? And you're like, because she's bonded to him, you know, like why doesn't she just leave that loser? Oh no, it's not that simple, right? Her body is screaming otherwise, you know. So this is, you know, so we take that right there, you know, just protecting our emotional side. And the other thing, the second reason I just wanted to point to that is that um, it's something like almost like an act of charity on the woman's part to take the lead with just kind of maintaining those boundaries, in part because men just get more excited more quickly, you know, like newsflash, you know, and and I think this is something women don't understand. Guys can tell you if they really wanted to, they won't. Women, not only do they get more excited more quickly, but once it's going, it's much more difficult to turn it off. And then at some point, it sometimes can become physically painful. Um, in women, you don't know that. Okay, that's not something we experience, but you need to know that, you know. And so it's an act of charity on our part, just to be like, hey, you know what? Let's, you know, women progress far more slowly. It takes a lot longer for women to get kind of amped up. So it's not that it's easy to stop, but it's a little bit like we maintain our heads, our brains are on a little bit longer. Okay, so that's part of the reason why we it's better for us to sort of take that lead. At least I think it is. The third reason of all, and this is the most important reason, is that for women, and it's true for both of us, but I think especially for women, is that chastity, or the practice of chastity, teaches us women to be secure in God's love first. And it teaches us to be strong. It teaches us to stand on our dignity as daughters of God, that we're worth the commitment. Marriage is an image of the love that happens within the Holy Trinity. It's an image of Christ's love for the church. So, you know, so this is a sacrament. It's a conduit of God's grace and God's love, and you know, and that in the love of a marriage, you know, a man becomes that image of God to us. But a man is not God. You are not God. Write that down. Sure. Okay. And so, you know, and so it's, you know, we can't that need for love, or that need for bonding that we feel within our bodies, we feel it within our bodies very strongly, but we need to maintain a horizon that looks beyond our spouse, that looks beyond the relationship that we are cultivating in the courtship, and hopefully the marriage that will ensue. And we cannot replace the love of God with the love of a man. We just can't, you know, like our men can't feel that. So, so again, so the practice of chastity just reminds our bodies. It's a way of disciplining our bodies in order to discipline our hearts, in order to embrace God's love more fully, which in turn helps us love our spouse and receive that love and have all the wonderful, beautiful things about marriage. So, a couple things, you know, just in terms of the courtship, in terms of commitment, it's really important. I'm going to end on this, is that, you know, the proposal is not enough. And I will tell you, engagement was a really hard time for me in particular. It was, I don't know, anyway, we can talk about that later. But that, you know, the commitment, it's not, it's the sacrament. It's the vow. The proposal is, I'm saying, hey, do you want to get married? And then the marriage is when you actually do the marriage thing. You know, the proposal's not the, you know, we build it up, but that's not quite enough commitment. The proof of a man's love in particular, according to St. Paul, is not in his passion, but in his commitment. Loving his bride and giving himself up for her as Christ loved and gave himself up for his bride, the church. So that's what I've got to say about the difference between men and women.
Yeah.
Your turn.
Thank you. So just so I love that. And so again, so now what do we do? How do we navigate this? So let me do 5 more minutes on the rules here, the guidelines, and then we'll open it up for questions. And when I talk about rules or guidelines, it feels oppressive to us. But the thing about rules is these are not imposed from the outside. Again, this arises from the nature of who we are, right, as human beings, with different sets of hormones, with different reactions, with just different bodies that God gave us, with which different brains that respond differently. And so these rules or guidelines are not just this like cultural imposition from the outside. These are things that allow us to flourish. So the first one, which is probably the most obvious one, which is obviously a very Catholic one, but just needs to be said in this day and age, is obviously no sex, right? So sex obviously is a kind of fusion without union, right? And this means no sex of any kind. So when we're in high school, we first base, second base, third base, home runs, right? We have this weird system and no bases, right? Just no sex. A little more practically, so what do you do? Okay, so we don't want to have sex. Good. Okay, but here's the thing: if you don't want to have sex, don't sit on the couch, right? So the couch is the beginning of all trouble, right? Because you think, oh, we're just gonna watch a movie, right? But you're not just gonna watch a movie, right? There's a part of you that's like, all right, well, I'm just gonna watch a movie. Oh yeah, we're gonna watch a movie, right? Anyway, don't sit on the couch. But also, what helps with that is spending time with others, right? So part of it is when you're falling in love and you have all those feelings, you just want to spend every moment with each other. I mean, you weirdos just will text back and forth for hours. I mean, so maybe you're just weird, so you don't have this problem. But if you are together and you want to spend time together, do things in public, right? So, I mean, you don't have to like be in a group, though that helps sometimes. But go out for coffee, go out for dessert, walk the streets, go for a hike, right? Just whatever, just things that are in public. But it also what that does is it helps you guys not to isolate, because when the relationship gets isolated, that's also when bad things happen. But that's also when, again, you lose the horizon of what this is for, right? Mm-hmm. That your marriage is for the world, right? It's not just for your personal fulfillment. It's for the world, and your relationship should enrich your friend groups. It should enrich your families, and so that's the next guideline, which is involve your friends, involve your family early on, and if your parents don't like this person, like take that seriously, I mean, it may not be a deal breaker, but take it seriously. More important, if your girlfriend or boyfriend does not like your parents and you like your parents, right, then that's also at least a yellow flag, probably a red flag. You have to have the same view of each other's parents, right? If she likes her parents, I need to like her parents. If I don't like my parents, it's okay for her not to like my parents, right? But you have to have the same view of each other's parents. Otherwise, it's going to cause tension in the long run. Yeah. Talking, right? I mean, this seems so obvious, but again, one of the things that premature physicality does is it cuts off conversation, right? If you start getting physical, you want to go there, right? Especially the men, because the dopamine comes, and that's a reward. It's like, hey, I did this last time, it felt good, I'm going to do it again, right? So it's like, it's logic.
Very smart.
It's very smart. You guys are very smart. But what the courtship does is it keeps that physical distance. And again, what that allows you to do is to talk. And what talking does is allows you to discern the character of the other person. Do I like talking to this person? Do I like listening to this person? Because I'm going to be listening to them for another 60 years, right? And she does talk a lot, right? So, so again, you have to know what you're getting into. One last thing just on this dance of courtship, and I thought Rhonda was very good. The old dance was generally male desire and female restraint, right? And that was kind of the dance, and that the women, the men, of course, were responsible for this. But again, naturally, they have more ardor, right? More desire, right? They express it more forcefully. They're more aggressive, right? In their pursuit, right? And women are often flattered by that, right? And that's good. And so again, the restraint of the women was again meant to be this dance of training the man to restrain his own desires, right? Which he would want to do because she's worth it, right? And so I do want to restrain my desires because she's worth waiting for. And that the waiting cultivates that appreciation of her qualities, right? Not just her body and her beautiful face, right? But also her mental and spiritual qualities, her character. That he comes to see her as a wife and then as a mother, right? That he can come to see those things, right? So the old mode, the old courtship dance was male desire, largely trained, coached, educated by female restraint. Your generation, I think, is in generally a new situation. So there's still some of that, obviously, and some of you will do that. But when I talk to young women today, the number one complaint I get from young women for the last 8 years that I've taught here is the guys won't ask me out, right? So it's not the guys are coming on too strong and I don't know what to do. I feel pressured to give in. It's nobody just asked me out anymore. And these are beautiful women, intelligent, beautiful, like physically attractive, and good characters. And right, so you think, the guys should be knocking down the door for them, but men have, in my generation, and then now especially in your generation, really been beaten over the head with the idea that male desire, male aggression, all these things are really bad to be, male. What's it called?
Toxic
masculinity.
Yeah.
And there is such a thing as toxic masculinity, don't get me wrong, but masculinity itself is not toxic, right? And that's the messaging that we receive. And so what men end up doing, especially young men, is they sort of retreat into a kind of passivity because they've been beaten over the head. And so so the men need to be sort of trained out of that, right? So again, just the encouragement, encourage all of your friends, ask girls out,
talk to them,
right? And talk to the ones you don't want to date first, so you can practice talking to girls, and then the ones you do want to date, then you're more confident, so that and women need to be patient with that. And women have been taught to be very aggressive and very assertive, right? And very ambitious, right? And that's why we have so many wonderful, talented women here, right? But it becomes even more intimidating for the guys who have been taught not to, right? And so there becomes this weird thing, and then nobody knows what to do.
Yeah, you're so awesome. They're intimidated by you.
They are intimidated by you.
No.
And I do, and I see a lot of my wonderful, talented women settle for not so exciting guys. So anyway, I mean, I think we do. I just want to name that crisis and that problem, right? Just that you're aware of it, So anyway, lots more we could say, but why don't we just cut off our yammering here and open the floor to questions. And I think you can unmute yourselves, and we'll just try to be as. Is
there hand raising or anything?
We'll see. People are usually slow enough to chime in, so.
Okay.
I have a question, just on like timing kinds of things, and like as someone pursuing a degree or like a PhD, like I don't know when I would want to like enter into a relationship like that, and like how long should a courtship like this last? Or like, yeah, I don't know.
I call this the woman problem. Like I think it's just like generally we all experience this because we're all educated. We have brains, we have at least a few marbles rolling around in our head, and goals and ambitions. And I think it's hard when you see like, okay, you know, you're talented, you've got things going on, and how do you make that work with a family? And that is not going to be that's a lot. I think that's going to be a discernment on every woman's part, like what that's going to look like for her, and also a discernment between, you know, a man and a woman as they are discerning all of this stuff. I had a really interesting thing because Jared had mentioned I did just I had my first novel was just accepted, and you know I've been working on fiction for about 10 years, and right before right before we had our first baby, I happened to have a really great conversation with a friend of ours. Her name is Catherine Pacolic. She's an economist at Harvard, or no, excuse me, at Catholic University of America, but she got her PhD from Harvard. And I happened to meet her when she was finishing up her dissertation. And that's when we got to become friends. And she had just had her 5th kid. and I was like, are you insane? Like, how does this even happen? And you know what? It was really interesting. We had a really great conversation about the way God uses time and just motherhood and what that looks like and what happens when you have an ambition. And she's an extremely intelligent woman. You know, she has 9 children. I saw her a few years back, and she had told me that the college she was at before Catholic U, she had all her classes scheduled in the afternoon, or she had like Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes, and then Tuesday, Thursday were her research times, and everything was scheduled during nap time, basically. So that's when she did her thing, was all during nap time. And I said, how are you getting anything done? Because that's not a really long period of time. And she said, I have 3 papers ready to submit. I was like, okay, you know, like God is the author of time. So, you know, like I said, 9 kids doing the PhD, doing the professorial thing. So, you know, so it is possible. It's not easy. And I think that's just gonna have to be every woman, and it's gonna have to discern that with her spouse.
Yeah.
Like, so
Like I'm kind of like starting to, or just like see that of like some women can do that and have 5 kids and get her PhD.
Not everybody can.
And like that is totally okay. And like I don't think that I am gonna have kids until I finish my PhD.
That's a really good point of discernment for you too. You know, I mean, that's an okay thing to say.
Well, but I just want to slow down. The thing is, I want to be careful with that. So that might be a true discernment, right? So that might be a true discernment, right? And that might be the right decision, right? So it might be. So I don't want to say it's not. But you're all young and you're afraid, right? You're afraid of commitment. You're afraid of kids, right? And no one's trained you for this, right? So you don't know how many kids you can have. You don't know what a relationship will look like. You don't know what you can and can't do, right? You know one thing. You know how to do school, all of you, right? That's the one thing you know how to do well, right? And so you do that, right? But you don't know what else you can do, right? And you don't know until you try. And so don't put roadblocks in what God wants to do in your life, right? If some wonderful man comes along and courts you and everything goes right, then get married and have kids. And discern together with your spouse, you know, what the right thing to do is, you know. Now, of course, if no young man comes along, just keep studying hard, work hard, find the cure for cancer, okay?
Yeah. Oh, and all of your science and everything that you've talked about is like 100% correct. And like as a young scientist, like I can tell everybody like that is 100% true. And like the brain structure of a male's brain and a female's brain are like built differently, and like the pathways that activate the dopamine are stronger in the male's brain than in the females, and like are like more like kind of straightforward wired, but like females' brains are like have like millions of wires in them, like they're good at like making connections and like being like intuitive and all of that kind of stuff.
I'm really glad you said that. It makes me feel a lot better about my dog. Thank you.
Good questions there. Other questions, concerns, objections?
How strict is that couch rule?
Ironclad. You could also put it in the chat if you're embarrassed. That's fine too. No, that was a goodbye chat. Things that would be helpful. Things we didn't cover. Things you've always wanted to know. Ask for your roommate. She wants to know.
I think maybe this is like a question kind of like on behalf of young men, but like other practical ways for like young men to approach women, like, and not feel like so intimidated by like someone getting her PhD or any of you girls here that I know. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things is, I mean, especially at Hope, so the girls need to be patient. One, because you outnumber the guys, so it's just a diminished pool. And two, on the whole, you're just generally more talented, and you mature faster, and you've been encouraged more. So ladies, certainly be patient, and yeah, find, you know, ways to build up your guy friends, you know, that are not demeaning. But yeah, I think for the guys, I mean, I think there's a few things. I mean, so you know, again, most guys have, you know, many guys have struggles with the internet, and again, that's just something that needs addressing earlier rather than later. And again, ways to address that, you know, here, if, you know, again, if you're Catholic, you know, confession, obviously. If you're not Catholic, you know, accountability partners, friends, Exodus 90, you know, these have been really successful strategies for just dealing with this. And so just pulling yourself out of some of that isolation, you know, builds just confidence and the ability. And then the other thing is, I think just try it, just do it. Rhonda wrote down Lenten dates. She wants me to tell you my Lenten date story, which some of you may have heard. So I didn't totally have this problem once I got to college. I asked out girls. So, you know, I like dating. I like pretty faces, you know, I like smart girls, you know, I don't have an issue with that sort of thing. So, but, you know, my issue was like, I put a lot of pressure on relationships, right? Because in part, it was like, you know, psychotic courtship, right? It's like, are you my wife? Tell me, you know. So I put a lot of pressure on relationships. And so I remember I really liked this girl. We were friends, you know, I had a friend group, right? So it was a very good friendship for a long time. And I liked her, and then she didn't like me. I mean, she didn't like me in that way, you know, as girls say, right? And I was sad. And I was, you know, I was heartbroken. I remember I was talking to my spiritual director about this, and I said, so I was telling him all about this, and it was Lent, and he said, you know, if I was your confessor, I would make you go on a date with a different girl each week of Lent. I was like, oh, that's a good idea. Tell me more, because I like girls. So tell me about that.
What a difficult penance.
I know, best penance ever. But then what he said was, he said, look, you just put all this pressure on relationships. He said, I would have you go out with these girls and just ask God to show you what's beautiful about them. And so, and he said it as a joke, you know, it's kind of like, oh, think about this. And I was like, this is a word from God. So I was teaching, this is right after college, I was teaching in the inner city. I lived in a community, there was 5 communities of teachers who lived together. So I was like, I'm gonna ask out all the girls in this one house. So I picked up the phone. Do you know what a phone is? Anyway, it had a cord. Anyway, so I picked up the phone and I called the house. It had a phone, one phone for the house. Anyway, like your grandparents. And I was like, hey, Keelan, it's Jared. Hey, you know, it's my Lenten penance. You want to go on a date with me? She goes, yeah, sure. I said, great. Put Mara on the phone because I'm gonna ask her out too. Okay, hey Mara, that's my penance. You want to go on a date? Yeah. Anyway, so Laquita, you want to go? So anyway, 4 days, one phone call. I mean, I was like the total stud of the whole teaching program. I mean, all the guys were like totally jealous. How'd you do that, man? I was like, dude, that's just how I roll, man. So anyway, I had a date each week of Lent, you know. So anyway, I called one other girl. I got 5 dates. So I took them all out, you know, took them out to dinner and then a show or something like that. And it was wonderful because I went and I prayed, you know, I just said, God, show me what's beautiful, right? And I had no other expectations, you know. All these girls, beautiful, talented, smart, wonderful teachers, you know, really just wonderful, wonderful young women. I could have like been crazy about any single one of them, right? Just given my own proclivities. But like what God did was he just like put the brakes on it. It was just like I was there and I just asked him questions and I listened. And there was always like one moment in the date where like the heavens opened and there was like this moment and I was like, oh my God, this woman's just beautiful. Look at her heart. Wow, beautiful. And then at the end of the night, I drop him off and I was like, she is amazing, but not for me, you know? And like, that was like a really important, like that was a very liberating sort of thing, right? So instead of like choking relationships to death, I allowed them to sort of be free, you know? Now again, like how does this translate for those who have, you know, challenges, you know, who are like scared to ask girls out? And of course, you know, you can't just call one house, you have to call 5 different cell phones, so it's hard. You know, so what does that mean? But also what it means is like, you know, asking a girl out on a date is not asking her to marry you know? So it's just like not that scary, you know? It's like you go on a date and you talk and it may be good and might not be good. It might be a little awkward. Okay, so it's awkward, so you don't do it again. Or you try it the second time, so, you know, maybe it'll get better. And then it doesn't, or it does, you know, and you just see what happens, you know? And then you can just say, okay, she's still cool. You know, we can still be friends, you know? We haven't crossed any boundaries. We haven't made it too weird. You know, we just had coffee, you know, a couple of times. Okay, so that's good. Yeah. So again, I think just like the more you practice that kind of thing, you know, and again, bring God into it. God, show me what's beautiful. God, show me where you want this to go.
Yeah, you know, and just like not having those expectations and also just those, you know, the really practical boundaries that we talked about, you know, around the physical side of it, because especially when they're like, hey, you're really nice looking, you know, that keeps it from getting really awkward later on, right? If it doesn't work out, if it tanks, you didn't do anything that you're going to be like, well, you know, golly, this is something I wouldn't want to tell my future spouse, you know, like, you know, so I mean, you just keep it clean and then see where it rolls, you know. I think that's probably, you know, yeah, it helps just on just the dignity side of it. So you maintain your own dignity too, you know, like, yeah, that's cool. You know, you can kind of just let it be.
Yeah, which is also part of, you know, again, just, you know, not confessing your feelings too early either, you know, because there is a kind of emotional exposure, you know, in the same way there's a physical intimacy, there can be an over emotional intimacy, right? And so again, just being slow about confessing those emotions as well. Anyway. But yeah, that was a great question. That was a great question. Looks like someone else had a question over there.
I guess going off your asking out like 5 women in one house story, so like that's an idea. Like the idea of that is not that I think there's something wrong with it, because like it, especially like first dates, like pretty, you know, non-committal, just kind of like just getting to know someone, and like so like it'd be fine to do that with like multiple people like simultaneously, but like I've always been very hesitant towards the idea because I know that it would rub a lot of people the wrong way. And I think part of that is because people don't, yeah, there's just a wide range of like what a first date means. And like you talked about, like with expectations and things like that. So I don't know if it's partly just like a time period and a culture difference, or like, I don't know, how would you address that? Because that's something I've always been like really hesitant about. So I'm like, yeah, I don't want to like scandalize anyone or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I'm not actually advising the Lenten date sort of thing. I mean, that worked because we were all friends already. It worked because we lived in houses. It worked because I was a character like in the community, right? It worked because it was Lent and I told them it was penance, right? So, I mean, one of the girls is actually in a relationship with someone else, right? So, I mean, it was like, you know, I mean, they clearly knew something was going on, right? So, and they were all just intrigued and, you know, it was just, it was fun. So like, it was kind of understood in some ways, right? There was already like there was a basis for it. So yeah, I don't actually recommend that. You know, one of the things that actually, you know, some of the courtship stuff actually happens naturally for you guys because you've all been taught that men and women can be friends. And I generally actually don't believe men and women can be friends. But like you all have guy friends and gal friends, right? And you know, you all just like will do things. You're like, oh yeah, you know, we have lunch every week, you know, or we have lunch, you know, or we get, you know, oh we get dinner at Phelps, you know, every Friday, you know, or whatever. I mean, like you just have these kind of relationships. I'm like, oh yeah, we're just friends, you know. And usually I think on one side it's probably not friends, honestly. But anyway, not to induce any suspicions, but like that's one way. I mean, it's a very kind of natural way in your generation of practicing some of this stuff, you know, is you guys just hang out in mixed groups, you know, and you guys often do, you know, male female things, you know, you sort of pair off kind of naturally for conversations or meals or coffee or whatever, you know, because you're friends, you know, and actually that could be a space of discernment, you know, with the right attitude. Again, you don't want to put romantic pressure on something that it's not there, right? But that's one kind of natural way of like, you know, okay, God, is this, you know, are you inviting me to sort of see this person as, you know, something more than a friendly acquaintance, you know? And maybe yes, maybe no, right? But yeah, I do think you're right, you know, in terms of actually sort of formally asking girls out, you know, or going on dates, you know, especially in a small community like Hope, and especially a small, say, Catholic pool, and then friends of Catholics, you know, who are Catholic friendly, you know, some of you are. Yeah, you don't want to be known as that guy who just like asks all the girls out and breaks their heart, right? You know, so, but again, you know, if you're a gentleman about it, and you know, then yeah, right. I don't think it's a big deal, you know, to try these things out, you know. But again, that's why I think, you know, for you guys, especially the friend space is an important space, an important place of discernment, you know, because you're already getting to know the character of the other person in that space, you know. Whereas in previous times, just men and women just didn't have this much interaction. You guys live together. You live on the same floors. You live in neighboring cottages, right? I mean, you have lots of congress. You have class together, right? And that wasn't the case, right? You had to have a ball or something, you know, for men and women to get together. But, you know, so again, that friend space, I think is an important space, you know, and then again, the formal asking out. Yeah.
And I think too, like, you know, it's just speaking about isolation. You always like know those people who once they get in a relationship, you never see them again. You know, those friends, and you're like, oh, where did so-and-so go? They disappeared because they're dating. And I think like it is nice to have those friend groups, because what do friends do? But they have common interests to talk about. And I think it does really like ground potential like romantic relationships on something that is worthy, you know, like the thing that, you know, that we're going to spend the most time, if you want to live with somebody and build a life with that person, they need to have something worth saying. You know, you need to have something of commonality to talk about, something interesting to talk about, you know, even if they're taking interest in each other's interests, that's fine. You can have separate interests, but like, there is just something about that cultivating that friendship, because friendship is a huge aspect of marriage, you know. And so so I think those are really good habits too. I think Jared's right, you know, that's just simply like that is a good space.
And it cuts down on the idolatry too, the temptation to idolatry. And again, we don't usually think about the other person, you know, as an idol, but just, you know, I'm going to find my meaning in this other person, right? And so we're going to spend all of our time together because this person is going to give me ultimate meaning, right? And that just wears thin after a while, you know. And so the friend group, again, mitigates that kind of idolatry, you know, and all of the romance songs, you know, in your eyes, you know, I found the truth, I found the light, I found life, you know, in this person, in the one, you know. Again, we're all habituated to think that, you know, but again, having those shared interests and those shared relationships and not coveting the person, you know, in that way, I think goes a long way to keeping it grounded. So I think that's wise.
Yeah.
I love it. These are great questions. Please, more.
I have a couple of questions for you. My first one is, how do you tell the difference between like fear of commitment and maybe like discernment that this person is not marriage material? Because I feel like they're kind of like similar feelings, almost like, I don't know. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So right. So I mean, again, I think this is in some ways you guys really have to know yourselves and know, you know. So one of the things is all of you who have this fear of commitment, which is pretty much all of you, you know, it's really worth, you know, bringing it to prayer almost every day, you know, doing examination of conscience every night and just saying, okay, what is this fear? When did I act on fear today? You know, when did I not make a decision based on fear? And also, what is the source of this fear? You know, I would do this. So my parents are divorced, right? Which created a lot of issues when I was dating, right? Because on the one hand, I wanted to find the one to get married to forever and never get divorced. And on the other hand, so I'd get into relationships too quickly, and then I would sort of drift away, and I'd realize they're not the one, but then I would not let them go, right? And then we would just be miserable, you know, for months. And, you know, that was my own issues sort of being acted out in these relationships, right? So part of it is you may not know at first because it may look like other things, right? You know, I always kept thinking like, oh, you know, I'll get over this annoyance, or, oh, I'll get over, you know, oh, if only I tried hard. Oh, if only she stopped doing this annoying thing, whatever, you know. I always had some kind of something, right? But after a while, I was like, you know what? I'm sabotaging these relationships. Like I'm getting in too fast and then I'm sabotaging them, right? And that's my own patterns, right? So it takes a while to sort of discern, like, you know, what are these, you know, unconscious mechanisms in us that feel natural. That's the thing. That's the thing, you know. And this is why, you know, if you ever read any like, you know, 12-step literature like Alcoholics Anonymous or something, or if you never know any of these people who have gone through this, you'll see that there's like generations of this, right? So like your dad's an alcoholic, right? And you're like, I'm not going to drink, right? But then you marry an alcoholic, but you didn't know this person was alcoholic, right? Well, how does that happen, right? Well, it's because there's like on some like deep unconscious level, your brokenness naturally gravitates towards this other person. Right? And so you know, if you come from some kind of brokenness, divorce, you know, addiction, right? Something in your family, right, that's broken, right? And that's many of us, right? You have to realize, like, if you naturally feel something towards someone, you might just want to pray, like, check it. Just be like, okay, is this healthy, right? If I like this person, right, it probably means they're messed up, right? And so again, it might not mean that might not be a deal breaker for the relationship, but you have to realize that, look, we're gonna have to heal together on this one.
Right. I mean, there's grace. You
right.
know?
Yeah. Right. So again, none of this is
Yeah, we're all screwed up together. It's fun.
Right. But then you have to be aware of it, right? So I think that's the thing with, okay, so if you know you have this fear of commitment, you know, it's like, when is this active, right? Is it active especially towards men? Is it active, you know, towards my vocation, right? Is it active to, right? I was talking to some students, you know, really recently, and, you know, they're afraid of good jobs. And these are like, you know, straight A students, and you're like, you'd be amazing at anything. And they're like, well, you know, I think I want a low level job. I'm like, what do you want a low level job for, you crazy person? Right? So, you know, that's the fear acting out in one way, right? So where does the fear act out for you, right? So it's just becoming aware of that, you know? And then, yeah, in this relationship, you know, it's like, yeah, the person might not be the right one, but, you know, it has to be not my own reflexive, you know, pain acting out, right? It has to be, yeah, this really is not the right one.
Thank you. I have one more. Would you recommend not courting when there's differences in denominations of religion? Or like how do you manage that along with discerning marriage and discerning everything else? With like, even just like within Christianity, I guess.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
So do you want to take it? I mean,
You could take it.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it's a hard one. So I think there's basically one of my mentors who taught me about courtship. She said there's three things you all have to agree on. Each other's parents. I said that, right? So again, if you like your parents, your girlfriend, boyfriend has to like your parents too. If they don't, it's just not going to work. Do you want kids, and how many? You know, are you open to kids? You know, that kind of thing. So children, right? And then religion, right? Now, the religion one is also complicated, right? Because on the one hand, you might, you know, if you're sort of dating an anti-Catholic, right, then it's like, okay, this is not going to work. But if you have someone who, you know, respects it, loves it, and says, of course, you know, I can't commit to it, but I'm willing to raise the kids Catholic, or, you know, whatever, you know, then, you know, in many ways you're agreed fundamentally on certain things, that, you know, that this faith is important, and it will be in the house, and it will be the guiding thing in the house. I think the real tensions are when there's not agreement, right? So again, you can have people of different denominations who say, yeah, denominations don't really matter, you know, and going to church on Sundays, you know, every other week is fine, right? And as long as they both agree on that, right, then I think they'll get along, you know? But if you're like, I'm all in, right, then at the very least, your spouse has to say, I support you in being all in.
Yeah.
That would be, I think, at least a minimum.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I mean, and just from our own experience, I was in the middle of our CIA when we met, and so so I'm a convert, and just giving the other person space is also going to be part of that dance, right? Because, you know, you're like, well, okay, we don't agree, but we can agree on how much can we agree on, and then how much, you know, like how much you don't want to put that pressure, that undue pressure on somebody in their relationship with God, and, you know, moving things along too quickly or whatever. So yeah, Jared did not propose until after I had received my sacraments. He waited 15 minutes, but he didn't propose until after I had received my sacraments. It was a big night.
Easter Vigil. Yeah, the other thing on this point is, so sometimes, you know, the difference in denominations is an issue, but also, you know, the centrality of Christ in that person's life, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because if you're like on fire and your boyfriend is kind of lukewarm, like that's going to grate after a while. But if, like, you know, he loves Jesus and he's, you know, but he's just always been raised whatever, you know, evangelical, but he thinks Catholics are cool, right? Then, like, I think that could really work. Like, if he's on fire for Jesus and you're on fire for Jesus, right? You're both looking at Jesus, and so you're going to keep moving closer together, you know, in that, you know. But again, if you're all about Jesus and he's like, yeah, you know, I'm about Jesus most of the time, you know, right? That's a disparity of cult that I think, you know, and that would be true of even dating a Catholic too, you know. Again, it's not always a deal breaker, right? If you can see the seeds of some growth, you know. but you can't bank on the other person converting or coming around, right? So you can't marry a projection of someone, right? You have to marry the person before you, right?
Thank you.
Great question. Good. Good time for another question or two, if they are there. I think there is there. I know you have a question. There it is. See, I saw it.
For like kind of like our prayer life before marriage, what should we like should we pray for our future spouse, or should we like pray for like that discernment even before we start discerning that? I don't know.
Absolutely. Yes. No, and I will say this. So sometimes when we have like a really big thing going on, Jared will email the Norbertine canonesses, who are this cloistered group of nuns out in California, and our joke is that they're like they come in with the bombs. They're the air raid. they clear the ground. And I think if you see your prayer life like that, because the thing is that most of us are called to marriage, right? There's some of you who are called to religious life, some of you are called to the priesthood, but most of us are called to marriage. And just given the nature of things right now, your future spouse needs your prayers. They need someone coming in with the air raid and the bombs dropping, like on a spiritual level, right? They need that. They need your prayers. And, and I think that's, I think if you think about that, just like, that person at some point, God's going to place you together, and not the one, but, your future spouse, someday that's going to happen. And, everything that's leading up to that moment is preparation for that moment, and preparation for that relationship. And so, yeah, absolutely. Pray for them, pray for yourselves, pray for an open heart, open eyes, but also, again, like, saying before, like keeping the horizon on Christ, right? Like, you're saying, like, you got a PhD to pursue, keep on pursuing it, right? Keep on trucking along, keep on doing the thing that is placed in front of you with fidelity to what Christ has called you today. But yeah, absolutely. Pray for your spouse. I think that would be, your spouse is going to need it.
So I'll tell this story, and this will be the last one. It'll be a good one to end on. It's the story of how we met, or at least my part of how we met, which has very much to do with prayer. So we were in Annapolis, and I had gone on a date with another girl who a friend connected me with, and she's very cute. She's kind of a lapsed Catholic, right? So again, disparity of cult. And so we had a nice time the first date, and then I was like, yeah, this is probably not going to work out. But then I'm so stupid, right? I was like, well, let's just go on a second date, because why not? Because I'm stupid. And so my brother is going to this concert in DC, and so he's like, hey, I got you a ticket. And I was like, oh, let me get a ticket. Let's try to get a ticket for this girl. And so, like, I spent like the whole afternoon. I was supposed to be working, and I spent like the whole hours like trying to get this girl a ticket, back and forth, phone call. And like, when you're forcing something and God's like, come on, dude, stop being stupid, and you're like, no, this is gonna be great, so I just like pushed through, and then like it ended up not working, right? I couldn't get her ticket. So I finished work and I was walking home, and I was like, that was stupid. That was a waste of time. What an idiot. I shouldn't have done that. That was really just impulsive, bad. So I was like, I'm going to go stop at the chapel, the Adoration Chapel. So our church had a 24-hour Adoration Chapel. So I'd stop in there after work. So it was Friday afternoon. So I go in there and I fall on my knees and I'm like, God, I am so stupid. I cannot do this. I keep messing this up, God. You have to do this, God. I can't do this. You have to do this. God, you do it. I am so dumb. You do it. And I was like, screw this. All right. So then I storm out of the Adoration Chapel, and who do I run into? But her. So we had met like once, and I thought she was kind of annoying, and but then I bump into her, and I'm like, oh hey, yeah, you're Rhonda, right? Yeah. And then we end up talking for half an hour about all sorts of really cool stuff. And I was like, and then I said goodbye, and I was like, oh, maybe. I know, it's so stupid. I was like, maybe a girl like that. I didn't even think it was her. I was like, maybe a girl like that who goes to church on Friday afternoon to pray. Maybe a girl like that.
Who has interesting things to talk
Who
about.
has interesting things to talk about. Yeah, we talked about books.
Who's less than annoying than you thought.
Yeah, much less annoying than I thought. And then, yeah, so then I went to the concert with my brother, came back to church, and then on Sunday, my friends say, hey, go down that hall. There's some pictures of us from such and such a thing. So I walked down the hall, and then I run to her again. And then I was like, oh, this is a sign from God. You want to have coffee after church? So then we had coffee after church for like 4 hours.
It was a long coffee.
It was a
day.
long coffee. Yeah, but it came from, right? You know, I went and I prayed and I just admitted my helplessness, right? I was helpless, so he saved me, right? So yeah, so absolutely pray now. You know, that God will introduce you to your spouse and that you'll have eyes to see it, you know, when that person comes. So
yeah.
Anyway, well, with that, I think that's probably a fine note to end on. But thank you all for coming out. Thanks for your good questions. Thanks for hanging in for this long. And yeah, if you haven't signed up for next week, make sure to sign up for next week. Will also be edifying. And I also have all your emails, so I'll send you a few reading suggestions if you want to think more about courtship and marriage. So with that, thank you all. Have a good night.
Good night.
God bless.